We spend far too much time worried about what makes us different than the next person or better than the next person, and not enough time thinking about why we should respect the next person. We all have a story, an overarching theme that runs through our lives and makes us who we are. The problem is, we think that since each of our stories is different, there's not a lot of perceived value and shared struggle. But we have far more in common than we can imagine, and what motivates one person can certainly help us as well. The Third Lap podcast is about understanding, respecting, and appreciating the struggle that it takes to overcome immeasurable odds in order to reach your destiny. Join me as I interview and bond with some of the most inspiring and incredible people, diving into their why to get a full understanding of their being. Without each other, we have nothing. So let's go on this adventure together and take on the future with open minds and open hearts. Welcome to the Third Lap podcast. Today, I really am so excited to welcome somebody that I have the utmost respect for, and someone that has really laid the foundation for me as an adult to overcome my odds and obstacles and really continue to chase my passions. It's, of course, my mother, Joanne Sills, author, revolutionary, former, and still, to a certain extent, current journalist. I'm really excited today, again, just to have this opportunity to speak with her and just get an opportunity to have her share her story with you all so that you get a chance to really be inspired as well. And so, Mom, Joanne, thank you so much for making some time to be with me today.
Peace.
And so, just to start things off, I would love for you to just give a brief introduction of yourself. I think I kind of summarized yourself, but, you've been on this planet much longer than I've known you. So who are you, sort of, what if you had, 30 seconds to kind of describe yourself, elevator pitch for people, how would you do so?
I'm a former journalist, and I currently write essays and fiction. I've always been a writer, always been interested in the word. I tend to skew toward, the nerdy side. I love the outdoors. I've just recently reconnected to a love of hiking and trees, and I'm a big jazz head as well.
And so here, usually I like to talk about how we know each other. It's pretty straightforward. She gave birth to me September 25th, 1985. The most amazing thing that ever happened in her life happened on that day, and it's just been amazing ever since. No challenges whatsoever. I was the perfect child, clearly. Uh, and so, but yeah, like I said, my mom is one of my biggest motivators in my life. I've watched her overcome so many difficulties as a single mother, transitioning from journalism into becoming an author, adjunct professor, really just one of the smartest people that I know. And, in a lot of ways, one of the greatest manifestations of her mother, J. Kane. So, I'm really excited to, again, have this conversation and really get a chance to deep dive into who you are and maybe even learn some things about my mother that I didn't know. Like I tell everybody, I wouldn't be who I am without my mom. And so, Joanne, just tell us a little bit about where you're from. This is your chance. This is the chance for everybody to rep their hood. So, what hood you repping?
Born and raised in Jamaica, Queens, in a beautiful little enclave of a couple of dead-end streets. I grew up on a dead-end street, Watson Place. And it was really beautiful growing up. Like most urban neighborhoods, it went through the transition in the 1980s. And there was a lot of drugs and crack, and there was a pretty famous multiple homicide 2 blocks away. And but I grew up on Watson Place, and it was a wonderful, stable upbringing with a lot of intact families. There were a lot of men on the block, and it was just a wonderful place to have been formed.
Absolutely. And so, what you talked to us a little bit about, like what it was like growing up in Queens, but you spent a good amount of your life in New York. So talk to us a little bit about your journey. What were some of the other places that you've lived so far?
When I started college, I began in NYU, but I graduated from City College of New York. I moved uptown. I lived on the 5th floor of a 5-story walk-up, and it was one of the most, and it represented a really great time in my life of independence, exploration. I was an avid bike rider. And it was a very lovely, lovely phase of my life. And when I went to grad school, that's when I left New York City for Philadelphia.
Yeah, and so clearly, without you coming to Philadelphia, I would not exist because you met my wonderful father here in Philadelphia. And so, just talk to me a little bit about that transition to Philly. What were some of the differences that you noticed? What brought you to Philadelphia?
Well, grad school brought me to Philadelphia. I wanted to leave New York City to explore another place, and it was either Boston or Philadelphia.
Hmm.
And I liked Philly. I liked the quaintness of Philly, and the black community had a very strong history of activism
Yeah.
and culture. One of the lovely things about Philly that was so different from New York is that music spilled out of every bar, every corner bar, and
Right.
and it was live music, so it
Yeah.
was jazz, and it started. It kind of ended. So I landed in 1980, and that was that was on the tail end of that. But by the time I land in Philly, I still can get a little bit of that history. They had many of the bars still had ladies entrances, and and it was just really a cool place to hang.
I think that some women still wish that these bars and clubs still had women's entrances so they wouldn't be getting harassed in that waiting line. But yeah, and I think Philadelphia, is something that a lot of people overlook when they think about the East Coast. They're looking at DC, they're looking at New York City, they're looking at Boston. But Philly has a lot of culture, especially in the art scene still to this day. And I encourage a lot of people to come out to Philadelphia, get a chance to experience it. Once we get through this pandemic, because clearly most stuff is
Yes.
closed. But on the other side of the pandemic, really get a chance to come out here to Philadelphia and experience the culture that exists because it's an awesome culture for sure.
Shout out to the art scene in Philly. It was vibrant while I was living there, and I'm anxious to explore it again.
Yeah, still very vibrant. Philly attracts a lot of really talented artists coming from different places around the country. A lot of folks coming from New York City, like yourself.
Hmm.
I've continued to encourage my friends that are into the arts out in New York to come down here to Philly. Cheaper cost of living, make a name for yourself a little bit faster because it's also not as inundated with people. You still can
Hmm.
really carve a name out for yourself and really get known in Philly because it's smaller. So yeah, it's the art scene is still great, something that I enjoy and look forward to enjoying again once we get to the other side of COVID. And
Yeah.
so we had a chance to talk about how we know each other, which was pretty straightforward. I got a chance to learn about where you're from, so you got a chance to rep your hood. Shout outs to Queens. I had a chance,
Yes.
so I was born clearly in Philadelphia, but my wife and I had a chance to live in Queens. I spent about 4 years in Queens, and it was a great experience for me to kind of be indoctrinated into the Sills family because I was the only
Yes.
one that didn't live in Queens or didn't live in New York. So, Troy told me the other day that I'm official now. So shout outs
Wow.
to the Sills family. I'm official. I did my New York state. I did my New York bid. I'm not
There
ever
you
living
go.
there again. But
See?
I did my time in New York, got the experience, and it was well worth it. I love that city. I always say that it's my second home. And so let's really, I want to dive into like the meat of why we're sitting down to talk today. This is really about us learning from other people's experiences as they've sort of went through their careers, overcame obstacles, and are now identifying like their true and natural why. So I would love to hear. Talk to me a little bit about like the beginning of your career. How did you establish yourself early on in your career, especially as a journalist?
Well, I went to my undergraduate degree is in cultural anthropology because I wanted to kind of be that Zora, Margaret Mead kind of person, going out, sitting down, collecting urban stories, talking to people about cultural trends, and so when I went to grad school, I was going to further that through some documentary filmmaking, but I had to work.
Yeah.
So I was a grad assistant in the journalism department, and that's when a job came across the transom for for a desk clerk at the Philadelphia Daily News. So newspapers kind of came natural to me. I
Right.
worked for and at one point headed the black student newspaper at City College called
Okay.
The Paper. And in high school, my friend Denise and I, we started an underground newspaper called The Political Educator. She allegedly still has copies. So when she comes back through, we're going to go down in the basement and try to find it. Um, so newspapers, and then my mother was a writer, and she was very
Yeah.
much into newspapers. And so I got this job as a desk clerk. And as I'm doing this job, I'm like saying, I'm reading what these people are writing in the paper, and I said, I could do better than this. And so when an internship came around, I said, well, you know what? I'm going to take this internship. And
Mm.
this is really a critical point in my life. I had just had a baby. You were just born. You weren't even a year yet whenever I went into this internship.
Right.
And the managing editor, who was a black man, who had the ultimate authority and to say whether I can leave my post as a clerk and go do an internship at the Daily News. And he brought me into his office and in very paternalistic language said, "You just had a baby. You know, you have to concentrate on being a mother now. If you take this internship, we're not going to hire you on. I can tell you that now. No matter how great you do, you're not going to get a job here and you won't be able to go back to being a clerk. So this is a big decision for you and maybe you better think about it." And he was just short of like patting me on the head. I
Right.
was furious, but very well a controlled rage.
Yeah.
And I said, I've made up my mind. I'm good. And I'm going to take the internship. I did. And let me tell you, I was probably, I still have the reputation of being one of the most outstanding interns that ever walked into the Philadelphia Daily News or the Philadelphia Inquirer. I hit the ground running. I knew how to talk to people. I knew how to do things. People liked me. Um, and and even when they didn't like me because I worked for the Philadelphia Daily News and black people and and the papers in Philly, which were just at war with each other, they would talk to me after a while. I found it a wonderful. It was the best time of my professional life so far.
Yeah.
Was working at that at the Daily News in that newsroom that was just always, always, always something going on, always trouble roiling in the corners. It was good. So
Yeah.
by happenstance, I see this ad for the clerk come across the desk. I decide to take a risk on myself.
Yeah.
It could have been exploded. I mean, I did just have a baby.
Yeah.
My relationship with your father was falling apart. So, it was just me that was going to have to pull this off. And I did.
You're listening to the Third Lap Podcast with Mal Davis.
And so, why do you think the managing director or the managing editor wanted to discourage you from taking that chance?
It was a paternalistic move.
Hmm.
He's a man. He's going to give me this fatherly advice. You know, he was acting in a way to protect me
Hmm.
because I didn't know how to protect myself.
Got it.
That made me mad.
Of
And of
course.
course, I ran this idea past my parents.
That was my next question. So, knowing your parents the way that I do, especially your mother, who was a revolutionary and was like a super forward-thinking woman herself,
Flamethrower.
and yeah, and your dad, who was a self-proclaimed feminist.
Yes.
What was their advice at that point?
He was a default feminist.
Right.
He had 5 girls. He had to
Yeah.
get them out their house on their feet in jobs, had his life so he can go on and live. So of course you support the power of women to do that. They said, even though you're far away from us, it's not that far. We're only a car ride away. and we got you. We'll support you in any way we can. If we can help you out a little financially, we'll do that. You need us to pitch in with Malcolm, we'll do that, and just go for it.
And so you make that jump, and you talked about just how vibrant that newsroom was. And as a kid that was raised in a newsroom, that as a toddler used to eat newspaper, I think that the journalism bug kind of got me too pretty early on.
Oh
But can
yeah.
you talk about what it was like being a journalist in the 90s? I remember you had some very controversial stories that you covered. You told me a story about how Buddy Ryan called the house, and I think that any Eagles fan would be just thrilled to know that Buddy Ryan called my mother. Stop hating out there in podcast world. But just talk to us because I do know some young folks that will probably be listening to this that are interested in going into journalism, potentially print journalism, if not multimedia. And so just talk to us about like what was your career like when you started out? Like what were some of the things that you had a chance to do? What sort of advice would you give to a young journalist?
um, well, the advice I would give to a young journalist, and I consider you a young journalist, is to pursue kind of the multimedia platform.
Yeah,
Print is going to be a thing of the past.
yeah,
It laid a lot of the good foundations for the journalism that we practice today on multimedia platforms.
yeah.
But it's something that isn't going to survive. I think even the New York Times has ended its paper or has a deadline to end its paper product. So the print part of print journalism, the print part of journalism is going to go away. But I encourage people to be journalists, to be citizen journalists. That you can go to some of these smaller venues or start podcasting yourself. And so there's not this dependency on legacy journalism, and we know who controls legacy journalism. It's the same problem with the gatekeepers of journalism, the gatekeepers of the literary world, white
Right.
men.
Yeah.
Um, so I encourage people. We just need it so much more now, especially in this zeitgeist of Black Lives Matter. Um,
Hmm.
and none of this is possible without the citizen journalism that's been going on out there
Right.
through videotapes and people just taken to the streets.
Yeah, I mean, and never want to downplay citizen journalism. I think that one of the positives of the uptick in social media and also with us all having cameras on ourselves is that we can
Mm-hmm.
document the things that are
Mm-hmm.
happening. I mean, without a
Mm-hmm.
camera, we would have never seen what happened to George Floyd. We would have
Mm-hmm.
missed out on a lot of the abuses that the police and that DHS have perpetuated on, innocent protesters. I discourage people from recording during these protests or during these riots when things kind of go left because we also don't want people getting their faces on camera or being put in a position where like there may be some sort of legal ramification that comes down the
Mm-hmm.
pipeline. I think that we
Mm-hmm.
also need to understand that much like with journalists, there's a certain level of integrity and responsibility that has to be in play. And so, we talked about the advice that you have. What were some of the difficulties, or I would say clearly at this point in time, like you're not with the Star Ledger any longer, you're not with the Daily News any longer, and so what was that mid-career crisis? What was the thing that sort of happened or took place in your life where you had to say, hey, this might not be it for me any longer, and I think now might be the time for me to start planning for something else.
I left Philadelphia and went to New Jersey as an editor at the Star Ledger, and that was a very different kind of newspaper.
Yeah.
Uh, and I wasn't happy there. It was
Right.
not the newsroom I had been quote raised in,
Right.
um, and there was a very dominant white male leadership there. Although they brought me along, I mean, but I was an only.
Yeah.
These at these news meetings, me and Glenn Proctor. The Star Ledger, was a completely different animal. There was equity and context in news, and I think part of the problem was it was an old broadsheet that covered a large swath of Jersey, and Black communities not so much. I landed there in the late '90s. The coverage of Black communities improved, but there was still this problem of getting them out onto the front page of the paper. So, there was a surprising amount of tone deafness in the news meetings that kind of surprised me because I came from the Philadelphia Daily News, and this is a lesson in the power of equity and context in news in terms of the people that you hire and put in positions of power. I was surrounded by uh, a lot of black talent and talent of color, not only as reporters in the newsroom, but also on the desk. Like Michael Days and Joyce Ingram and Ernie Young. And it was Jackie Jones who saw in me the ability to lead, and she brought me on the desk. So, that's the first time anybody said to me, wow, Joanne, you have a great sense of news and you can lead people. So she invited me to the desk, and that's how I became an editor. Um, it was it was a wonderful experience there, and then showing up then at this kind of old broadsheet in a traditional sense where there wasn't that sense of people of color being in positions of power, and that was my experience there. And so the newspaper offered us buyouts in 2008. I took it, and it was a great time for me to transition because I had already done some time at Columbia's creative writing program, and then I just transferred to Newark's that was much less expensive and more convenient.
Yeah.
And so I was able to do a year to finish up my MFA in a year, and then move into teaching and writing fiction and nonfiction.
It's important to highlight what you said about being the only Black woman in those manager rooms. I remember you coming home and talking to me about that. You're sitting in rooms where there's not a lot of representation, and you're sort of forced to be that voice in the room that represents everybody. And that becomes difficult because like you're only one person, right? You're not
Right.
everyone. You're not that wide rainbow of the spectrum that should be sitting at these tables. And so the
Mhm.
pressure that's put on you to be that voice can become tremendous. So can you talk a little bit about that, about sort of what it was like being that representation for Black and brown people and for Black and brown women?
So I had to pick my battles.
Yep.
Uh, and I remember one day when the uh, when the black painter of the migration series, Jacob Lawrence, died, and he was in a little corner of the features page. So that's a section behind the news, behind business. I was furious because who doesn't know Jacob Lawrence?
Right.
What what deficiencies, what deficit in your education do you not know that this is like a famous black painter,
Right.
a famous painter? And so I went in and I spoke to them and I said, tomorrow we should do a nice front page kind of retrospective of his work and try to make up for this big error. And that's what they did. Um, there were times when they would uh, want violent stories on a lot of crime on the front page without crime without context.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so we would talk about that, and I would always encourage them to take longer looks at some stories and place them in wider context of the humanity of people living in that neighborhood. That was the kind of those are the kind of things. And then I remember once I if I thought the antagonism between the black community and the Philadelphia Daily News was tight, oh, the Star Ledger in Newark, don't even mention you work for that paper. So there was always this tension.
Yeah.
So that group of black clergymen came to the paper to talk about our coverage. I forget specifically about what it was. It was probably something about crime. And they brought me in the room as the black editor. That's how I was introduced. And this is the black editor, Joanne Sills. I'm like, I'm not the black editor. I'm a black woman, but I'm an editor. And so
Right.
and so the pastors were upset because I was saying I wasn't a black editor. But I calmed them down. I said, listen, it's just a thing here. People want to put you in a box and keep you there. How can I help you? And we began talking. But that's what they look at you as, the only black person that could possibly do this. And we were in a newsroom full of very talented young people that they could have brought along, but they did not.
I really wanted to just thank you for the fact that like you continue to push on and push forward and not give up. And you come home and talk about those two-a-day meetings and about some of the microaggressions and taught me a lot. As I was going through some of my difficulties attending private schools and really, when my depression hit and my life kind of went off the road for a bit, this was what kind of brought me back because I knew that if I didn't motivate myself and if I gave up, I'll be disappointed not only you but myself because I've listened to
Yes.
you fight through so many different things and provide me so many different opportunities that giving up was never really an option. So, I think that I've thanked you before, but definitely want to thank you for all of the hard work and everything that you did and just the determination, going to grad school with me, wilding out, and your mom coming to live with you. Don't think
Ooh,
that I skipped any of that stuff. I noticed it and
ooh,
I appreciate you for it.
ooh. If I ever thought I was going to go crazy and
Yeah.
then losing my job,
Yep.
it
Exactly.
was just a lot of anxiety. Um, But if I could just say something,
Of course.
I'm not I don't consider myself a religious person, but more of a spiritual person.
Yeah.
And Most High got me through the tight spots.
You're listening to the Third Lap Podcast with Mal Davis.
And so we talked about like your career to this point, the difficulties, that buyout, which was sort of that make or break moment for you. It was the buyout by gunpoint.
Yes,
And at that point you then really start to pursue who you've always been, which was a writer, a creative writer to a certain
hmm
extent.
yes,
And I've been able to see and again gain so much motivation from this transition of this moment where you decided and took your career by the reins and realized it was time to become the author that you always knew you could be. And so here we are now, right? In 2020, you've overcome these things. Talk to us about who you are now. What are the things that you're working on? What projects do you have going on? Where are you right now in your career?
I'm at a I'm at really a great place, even though all the writing spaces that I liked are taken away from me because of the pandemic. I
Yeah,
love writing I love libraries, period. But I had a couple of favorite libraries that I liked writing in, and so that's gone. But It's at a good time. We are going to get out of this,
yeah,
um, and we are going to get out of this, and we're not returning to some dumb idea of normal.
right,
We can't. Normal wasn't good for us,
right,
especially Black people.
right,
Um, so we are going to get out of this. And so what I'm working on now is really two projects. One is a collection of short fiction and short essays. I've been blessed to have three of those essays published this year in
yeah,
various literary magazines. And I'm also writing a novel. I wrote a novel eight years ago. It just didn't go anywhere. It was during the recession. I'm a first time novelist and I'm writing about Black people. So
right,
it didn't go anywhere. um, so I took some of the characters out of that old novel, three of them that I really liked, and I've set them in a new plot. And so I'm working on that.
You mentioned being published. Can you talk to us a little bit about that? Like, what's that process been like? There are authors and writers that I know that are still working to get published. And so, talk to us about what did that feel like after, having that experience of writing a book that you said really didn't go anywhere. But now you're writing these short stories and you're getting, the recognition, Bosco Girl, and the essay that you have coming up that'll be published about your mother. What does that feel like?
It feels wonderful. It feels like getting past the gatekeepers.
Right.
Again, I talked about the gatekeepers in journalism, the same people in the literary world. And one thing that's happened during this pandemic and the upheaval is that is that I think finally the white establishment is going to listen to Black people, and
Right.
they're going to say, well, send me your work and let me read it. um, I think just like how journalism has opened up to new and different kinds of people doing new and different kinds of reporting and storytelling, so has the literary world.
Right.
It had to. So some of the old stodgy literary presses, like the Gettysburg Review and Plowshares, and all of those all of those very established old old outlets are now finding competition with new online outlets that
Yeah.
are more open to a variety of voices and not just letting one Black poet through and one short story poet through
Right.
and one short story writer through and said, look, we're diverse.
Yeah.
So it felt really good to be in McSweeney's, which is a very respected literary outlet. It felt really good to be in Auburn Avenue with all writers of color,
Yeah.
all writers from the African diaspora. And and Joyland, that's going to have my latest essay in it, is a well-respected magazine, and I couldn't be happier.
Absolutely. And again, congratulations. As
Hmm.
someone that's seen you go through this whole process, it brings me so much joy because,
Hmm.
I remember you getting those rejections from some of the work that you put out. And, again, you're a testament of keep on pushing, right? Because you never use that stuff as a reason to stop. Use that as a reason to keep going because you realize that at some point you get that yes. And you went to these Cambodia and, all of these different
Ooh,
writing, yeah,
yeah.
all of these different sort of places and these writing boot camps, for lack of a better word, where you've connected with and networked with different people and got a chance to see that your writing is legit, that you're out there with people
Yeah.
that have been published and are probably better well known than you are at this moment, but you're gaining traction on those folks. And so, again, I just want to congratulate you for that and really just celebrate with you in this moment because, again, being my mother, I've gotten a chance to see you make it through all of these different hurdles from being a desk editor, of being a intern, all the way to being one of the best editors at the Star Ledger, and then now making this transition to becoming a really well-known writer and
Mhm.
author. It's a beautiful thing to see and has provided me everything that I need to know as an adult that at no point in time do you stop. That when you feel that
No.
passion and when you feel that fire burning, it's imperative to pursue it.
Yeah, that's very grandma-ish.
Absolutely.
Catherine Sills.
Yep.
She kept at it up to 98.
Up to
Kept at it,
98. Right.
reading, writing, in
Yep.
her children's business, getting out to the books, just like you, and just calling. And so, one new thing that I'm encountering, I know all about being a woman and being a Black person, but is ageism.
Yes.
I'm 67. People want to uh, set you set you out in the pasture. You
Yep.
know, they want to pasture you, and I'm not going.
Yep. As a person that works in talent, ageism is something that I can't stand, and I feel like it's a lazy practice by people in my position. You have
Hmm.
to get to know a candidate. Their age is not a determination of their skill or ability. Some of the best educators that I've worked with have been career changers, people that spent 10, 15, 20 years doing something else, realized that education is where they wanted to be, made that change and gave it everything that they had. I have 24, 25-year-olds that are barely hireable at this point because they don't know what professionalism is. They don't know what it's like to grind for something that they really care about. And, so ageism, I feel like I need a whole episode of a podcast to talk about ageism itself.
No, but I just wanted to say,
No,
that
absolutely.
your, the struggle continues, and
Yeah,
you talk about microaggressions of ageism. They're
yeah,
deep.
they are.
Really?
I believe it.
I'm like, really?
I believe it.
But
And
anyway.
with the father that's 70, it'll be 71 in January. I experienced it on both sides because he's somebody that is absolutely hireable. Is somebody that absolutely has a lot to contribute, especially as a drug and alcohol counselor, but can't get a job, can't get an interview, can't get hired because his resume is so long and because it's clear that he's in his 70s, if not his late 60s. And so ageism, something that I can't stand. When I hear it, it makes my blood boil. And again, I'll think about it and probably dedicate a whole episode to talking to folks that have
That's cool.
experienced this because I think that this is something else that needs to be talked on. And so,
Yes, I encourage that because young people really don't dig it.
no, not at all. And we'll go through it at some point, right? Like we'll get
Yeah,
to that point
God
where we're the
willing.
older, exactly, we're the elders in the room.
God willing.
Absolutely. And so I would love to hear about your why. What's your motivation, right? Like I talk at length about you and my dad being my motivation, my grandparents. I have clearly some people that I look up to from the Panther Party and stuff like that that really help me to understand the world that's around me. But who was your motivation or what's been your motivation? Why have you decided that this path is the path that I'm going to pursue? And no matter what happens along it, as you've highlighted throughout this entire conversation, I'm always going to continue to put that step one foot in front of the other and get to where I know I need to be.
The people that motivate me are mostly, close. They're people that I know, and I also have, the motivators, the women of literature, and the power struggles. But when it comes down to it on a daily basis, it was my parents,
Yeah,
my mother, her side of the family, and their struggle, and they really did struggle in Pittsburgh, and they
yeah,
kept it together. My father and his side of the family, down there in the South with all that racism
yeah,
and struggling to keep the farm going. So on a personal level, those are my heroes. Um, and then I had the great, God blessed me with the great opportunity to add another person to that, and that was Maria Nita Davis, who is your, of course, grandmother
paternal grandmother. Yeah,
and my great friend.
yeah,
So my heroes were personal.
yeah,
Then I wind up kind of laterally with great girlfriends.
yeah.
Uh, Urban Guerrilla Band number one.
Yes,
We
sir.
got through high school together.
Yes,
We
sir.
pulled each other through high school and all the tumble of teenage years.
Yeah,
And then and so again, personal heroes. And then my literary heroes. One of my best teachers was the writer June Jordan, and
mm-hmm.
um, and I read Toni K. Bambara, and I
Mm.
thought, wow, I could really identify with what she was doing, and the poets and the playwrights, Robert Hayden, Lucille Clifton. So these are all my heroes and people who helped me get through moments.
Yeah,
Yeah, because they still come for you every day.
yeah.
It's just whether they get to you or not.
That's it. That's it.
Mhm.
We're getting to the tail end of this. I really do appreciate your time today. I'm looking forward to publishing this episode. I know I told you at first this was going to be a sample episode, at which
Mhm.
point I come back to doing this all over again. This was great, in my opinion. I think that this is something that deserves to be published and deserves to be heard by the world and by the people that know you and know me because they know our relationship. They know what we've been through. If they know us, they know what we've been through. And,
Mhm.
this is a testament to that time that we spent with each other. because there were plenty of years it was just me and you. And
Oh,
we had our difficulties, our trials and our tribulations, but we also had a lot of triumph to be able to celebrate that, because I think that you and I both wondered if this was going to happen. And so, for us to
there
both be here, yeah, there were times we don't have to speak on them.
no,
We ain't got
no,
to
no, no,
speak on them.
no.
But
There were times.
there were times where this wasn't always a guarantee for
But
sure.
you were my road dog. You were
Absolutely.
faithful. You were
Absolutely.
full of love. You were funny and so smart. You were such a thrill just to hang with. And we do our little nerdy talking and stuff.
And
Do you
so,
remember this woman was
uh,
overheard us at some restaurant, and she said to me, she said, "Yeah, I love how you and your son talk to each other.
yeah,
Parents don't do this with their kids." So I
right.
said, "Yeah, that's us."
So I want to give you a chance because you always tell this story about how I was chauvinistic as a child. So I
He
love
was
this story.
born a male chauvinist pig, people.
I love this story because it's hilarious, but also shows how far I've come. Because if you know me now, I'm not chauvinistic. I'm very open-minded to all people. But my dad and I were laughing about this story the other day. So I want to give you a couple minutes here to tell this story, just to highlight how far I've come since a young guy.
Okay, so as you know, me and my son, we kind of in it together. We're a team. He sees me hustling, and so one day we're running for the train, and the subway, the whatever, the Broad Street line,
So,
and we're running for the train, and then so the train isn't pulling off because it's waiting for the engineer. So the engineer comes walking by, and it's a woman. And Malcolm, who is like 4 years old, I guess, says out loud, "A woman can't drive a train." Ooh, the conductor stopped short. And she turned around and she said, "Oh, I'm going to drive your train and you're going to get to where you're going." And she was very nice about it, kind of laughing too. I was mortified. If I could have turned red or disappeared, I would have. Oh my God. And so I kind of looked at you. I probably just kept looking at you through the whole train ride, like, where did that come from? Yeah, so yeah, he was a little piggish when he was young.
Just a little bit. I'm growing out of it though, but I feel
Hmm.
like that story really highlights the sort of societal conditioning that we go through,
Yeah.
because I knew plenty of strong women. I
Hmm.
saw a tweet that somewhat disparaging towards black men, but a black woman was asking, it's like, do you black men even have any women heroes? And like I made sure to jump in and I named you, I named all of my aunts, I named all of my grandmothers, I
Hmm.
named Asada Shakur, I named Queen Nzinga, I have plenty of
Hmm.
them,
Hmm.
But even with those, you still get conditioned to believe in these gender roles and that a woman
Hmm.
can't do this and men can do that, or men can't do this because that's a woman's job. And at 4 years old, even though I had a mother that hustled, I had plenty of aunts that were going after it. I had two grandmothers that were absolutely just matriarchs of their families. It didn't dawn on me that a woman could do that work. And so, I like I love that story because again, it highlights so many things that need to be spoken on. And when I have a daughter, that's something that I want her to understand, that there is nothing that you cannot do. There's nothing that you cannot accomplish. If somebody tells you that you can't, go get your father and I will show up and let them know why you can do those things, and there will
Hmm.
be no one that can stop you. And
Hmm.
I really hope that we can continue to move into a world where that's the conversation that we're having, because it's unfair. And that woman worked really hard to get to where she was. To have a
Hmm.
4-year old question her ability, I'm sure it was funny, but also was just like, again, another person questioning my ability to do this.
Right, right, right. And things are going to be so different for your children and
Absolutely.
for my great nieces and nephews,
Yeah.
because those gender walls are falling. And I mean, we go around with a lot more ways to self-identify,
Yeah.
for instance.
So as we close things out here, I just wanted to give you an opportunity to give some motivational thoughts for the people. So there's a couple minutes where you really get a chance to speak to the people. whatever people you want to speak to, identify them as a group. Is it general? Is it specifically for any group of people? And what motivational thoughts or wisdom would you provide to them that you have not provided already in this podcast?
I think I said it a couple of times, but it bears saying again is to uh, just never give up. Keep
Yeah,
throwing yourself at it. There will be people, there will be places that are going to try to inhibit your process. They're going to try to steal your dreams, but don't let them.
yeah,
Uh, who says it's going to be easy? I mean, part of it is the struggle, but keep at it. And I must say, I am so proud of young people
absolutely.
out there on the streets, and not just one night. I mean, every night, and you're bringing it. And we are
Yeah,
going to see a change in this country. We are going to
absolutely.
take our country back.
Absolutely. I want to reiterate that I'm extremely proud of some of the younger millennials and definitely Generation Z who catch a lot of flack for being different
Hmm.
and being unique. But
Hmm.
they're going to be the ones that change the world. It's not me. It's not, I'm a dinosaur at 35, right? Like my generation is still very much caught up in some of the archaic thoughts towards how
Hmm.
things should be. And so I'm here for the dismantling of all of those things because, like
Hmm.
you said before, coming out of this pandemic, that was not normal. That was
Hmm.
abnormal and
Hmm.
destructive to us and destructive
Hmm.
to our mental health and well-being. And so let's continue to destruct and destroy and deconstruct and reapply and continue to workshop and make sure that everything that we do is working towards the benefit of the people. You know, like the Panthers always said, all power to the people. It's not about the bourgeois, it's about the proletariat, it's about the people. And so we'll always continue to work towards a better outcome. I really appreciate your time today. This was an awesome opportunity for
Absolutely.
me to just learn
Thank
more
you.
about you outside of just our regular opportunities to talk.
Hmm.
You know, we spent what, like 5 months not seeing each other through the pandemic,
Woo,
but getting a
woo.
chance to see
That
you
was
in person,
that was
yeah,
tough.
that was tough. And arguably the longest we've spent since I was in college down in Florida.
Yeah.
And so it was good to be able to put my arms around you and hug you. I look forward to seeing you again. You know,
Too.
everything that we talked about today, I think really is applicable in so many ways to so many people that will eventually hear this episode.
Hmm.
So I hope that your experiences and that your story can be motivation to all of the people coming behind you. What you said is so important. It's something that I have blazed into my mind, which is never give up. And so thank
Hmm.
you again, Mom. This is Joanne Sills. I will have her contact information, links to her articles on the website and on my social media. Do you have a social media that you want to share with people if they want to search you up or follow you?
Sure. JoJo sells on Instagram. Is that how you say it?
Yeah, yeah, that's good.
Okay. I'm JoJo Sills on Instagram, and I'm Joanne Sills on Twitter.
Absolutely. And again, I'll have her handles for Instagram and Twitter available on my social media and the social media account for the Third Lap Podcast. Everybody, thank you so much for listening. This is the Third Lap Podcast. This is Mal Davis signing out. Thank you for tuning into another episode of the Third Lap Podcast. This is your host, Mal Davis. Please visit thethirdlappodcast.com for more information about the podcast, about our guests, and also to see our reading list. You can find us at The Third Lap Podcast on LinkedIn and Facebook, at Third Lap on Twitter, and at third_lap_podcast on Instagram. If you know anyone that would be great to be featured on this show, please reach out to our host, Mal Davis. He's always looking for interesting people to learn more about them and to talk about their pathway. Thank you so much again. Have a good one.